putting on finishing touches, such as this board above the door. Next step is sheathing the building itself, now that the roof is done. Unfortunately, I have only 2 sheets of plywood. All of this is 1/4 inch for the interior, but I did not estimate high enough, I guess, or what probably happened is come to think of it, when I built the workshop, I did not think about using any awnings, and then I immediately thought that I should really create some awnings for the large doors. So I probably ate into my supply of plywood that I set aside for this project when I placed that order, which was over a year ago now. So what I'm going to do is scour the workshop for all the scrap and just sheathe it with all the scrap. So code would be, everywhere you have a break in the plywood, you have a board, and then you affix the plywood there, 6 inches on all sides, and then you start your next sheet of plywood, etc. So you definitely don't want to use scraps if you're doing it to code. And the thing about framing is, all of this conventional framing that we use these days requires all the shear strength of the sheathing. So the strength really comes from a combination of the sheathing and the framing itself. So technically, the building will be substantially weaker from the lack of complete pieces of plywood. But again, it's a well house, and I'm loving the idea of getting rid of all that scrap. Alright, so what I did here was I put about 2 staples every 6 inches, and then I decided to on each side, so on 4 feet, about 1 screw every 4 feet. So, and I just did that because that will provide a little bit more pressure if it decides to want to work any of these staples out. So I think between the 2 of those it should be fine. Well, I couldn't help myself. I figured that since this first piece of plywood was actually a full piece, this whole wall is going to be sheathed properly, I might as well actually put in these breaks here. If I recall correctly, you're supposed to have an 1/8 of an inch spacing between plywood. I have the sheathing done. It's not going to win any beauty contest, but it is done, and it is primarily scraps. This kind of gap here, I may or may not leave, but the solution to this is to stick another board across here and then tack it again. And you're supposed to tack every 6 inches. I did eventually about every 3 or so inches and just set a staple. This side, well, let me point out, this side is touching a piece of 2x4 no matter what. So technically, as ugly as this side is, it's basically code, except for this gap here, which, like I said, I may fix. And the same with this side, which I used fresh stock for. So this side was easy and it went really fast. That's how it's supposed to be. These are complete 4x8 sheets, so it was easy to fit that. Then I ran out and just started using whatever junk I had laying around. This side is completely not code because it has all of these breaks without blocking behind it. Now if I was to stick 2x4 perpendicular and tack, technically this could also become code. I'm not going to do that though. I figure I have everything overbuilt tremendously already, and I'll have 2 sides that are extremely strong. I also put screws in about every foot, and I only did that out of paranoia. I don't trust things that just get pushed in with pressure like nails or staples. I just find that if there's enough movement over time, they tend to work themselves out. So I decided to put some screws in. Here's a flashing. I just rolled up and tacked. Here's a quick video on installing foam board and some notes. You're supposed to put these every 12 inches in a grid. However, I think that's overkill, because by the time you're done putting your tyvek up and your siding, you're already going to be at probably significantly more holes than that, which brings up another point. They say to use something like this, and although that holds the material in a much broader area, which is good, it doesn't exactly seal it all that well. So I'm not sure how much good it really does. And same goes for details like this. This little 1/4 inch gap here, that's a huge energy loss. So you would have to basically spray foam every single seam. However, the material itself expands and contracts a 1/4 inch, which brings up another point. It's a pretty hot day today, probably around 75, so my gap here is pretty small. Wanted it bumped up pretty tightly because once it gets colder, it's going to contract. So I have to wonder how much of foam board on a building is simply dogma versus actual reality. Just finished wrapping this in house wrap. I actually ran out of this Lowe's stuff, but I wanted to point some things out. This Lowe's stuff is little more than a vinyl tarp with perforations. You can actually see the perforations. I have the door on. Note that this is actually an inside opening door that I just rearranged to go outside. The siding is basically done, but the soffit remains. Take a shot of how this all turned out. Looks pretty good. I think vinyl siding is one of the best parts of building something because it's sort of instant gratification. Does not take a lot of effort. You cover a foot or so vertically at a time. I have this gable screen on here. It's a combination of hardware cloth and fine metal screen like you would use in a door. Okay, so here this is with some F-trim. Here's my fascia, which has a bit of a lip, about a 1/2 inch, 3/4 lip. And you can see how this turned out. I bumped it right up to there. I stuck a screw about 1 per panel just on the edge, tying it into that to make sure it doesn't move too much. Alright, so here's what I came up with. Little J channel across the top here. In retrospect, I do wonder if I should have actually used wood, or if maybe I should have just gotten a breaker and used some trim coil. I'm okay with this though. It's fine. Thought it was pretty cool yesterday that I made pressure treated trim. And I was wondering why you don't see this in the stores. Well, I figured it out. This piece was a little bit wetter than the others, and I did see some of the same thing, but you can see the finish is just really rough. That's because it's not actually cutting anymore, it's peeling. Doing this kind of crap, and it clogs up the router quite a bit as well. Now this is a well-used routing bit. It's large and it's low speed. So I'm sure that's part of it, but nonetheless, the peeling was excessive. I had to stop the machine multiple times to clear it out. I'm not entirely sure how you're supposed to handle merging these offhand, but I decided to butt a couple F-trims together, like this, and then tie them into this. I ended up having to put some F-channel on here after all, because it was just too loose without it. I wasn't comfortable with it, but I have about 1 inch here. Yeah, so I suppose I'll have to put some J-channel and a partial. It's just such a mess. I always feel gross when I work on stuff like this. Alright. There's this corner, how that turned out. And there's this corner. So there really wasn't enough room for J-channel. I couldn't even fit the J-channel, nonetheless a partial, so I just did a partial and tacked it with a nail every few feet. Figured as long as I cut it really neatly, it wouldn't look too bad. And it's not like there's any potential for water to get in anyway. It's really just an aesthetic touch. Just been working on all the little details. This is a nice electrical junction, and basically you tuck it underneath your siding, and then you have this piece which goes over it, and it just creates a really nice look. I did this in my workshop as well.